The last year has been one of great change and even greater challenge. A year in which the effects of the climate crisis have become too visible to be ignored.
Stop. Before you click away, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear is not another royal family story about who said what at a dinner table. It is not gossip. It is not sentiment. It is the story of a billion-pound institution that has operated in the shadows of British public life for nearly 7 centuries, quietly funding the private ambitions of whoever happened to hold its title, until the day that title passed to a man who had spent years studying every inch of what he was about to inherit. This is a story about power, not the theatrical kind that gets photographed at coronations, the structural kind, the kind that lives in authorization forms and governance protocols and the quiet revision of who is permitted to sign what. The Duchy of Cornwall just changed. And the person most affected by that change did not see it coming, not because she wasn't paying attention, but because she had every reason to believe the informal arrangements that sustained her for 2 decades were permanent. They were not. They never are. And by the time this video is over, I think you'll understand why that lesson doesn't just live in palaces. It lives in every office, every family, every financial relationship you have ever built inside someone else's structure. So when the structure shifted, who got left behind? Stay with me, because this is where the story actually begins. Before we go any further, if this already feels different from what you usually find on royal commentary channels, that's intentional. At a time when too many channels are driven by speculation and emotional manipulation, this space is built for something better: clear thinking, real value, and disciplined analysis. We take the stories that matter and examine them with depth, balance, and perspective. If that's the kind of content you've been looking for, subscribe right now, turn on notifications, and add your thoughts in the comments below. Thoughtful discussion is always welcome here. Now, let's get into it. To understand what William just did, you first have to understand what the Duchy of Cornwall actually is. Not the surface version, the real one. The duchy was established in 1337 by King Edward III. His purpose was direct and deliberate: create a private estate that would give his son and heir total financial independence from Parliament, from political rivals, from anyone who might otherwise use economic pressure to control the future king. It was, at its foundation, an instrument of insulation. The heir would be funded not by the state, but by the land. And the land delivered. Over the centuries, the duchy grew into something extraordinary. More than 52,000 hectares of land across 20 counties in England and Wales. Farmland, commercial property, forests, coastline, the Oval Cricket Ground in London, leased to Surrey County Cricket Club since 1874. Dartmoor Prison, a plant nursery, roughly a third of the entire Dartmoor National Park. When the duchy's net assets were formally valued at the end of Charles's tenure, they came in at over £1 billion. Annual income, £21 million. This is not symbolic wealth. This is operational wealth. Functional, private, not subject to corporation tax, because the duchy is not classified as a company. Not subject to capital gains tax, because the heir is not classified as a typical owner. A parliamentary committee has previously called for an investigation into the estate's tax arrangements. The scrutiny exists. It has always existed. But the duchy has continued, largely unchanged, for nearly 700 years. Its purpose has always been the same: to protect the heir from dependency, to make the future monarch financially sovereign before he is politically sovereign. So ask yourself, what happens to that protection when the heir becomes something else entirely? For 50 years, the Duchy of Cornwall belonged to Charles. He became the longest-serving duke in the estate's history. And in 50 years, he did not simply manage the duchy. He shaped it around his own values, his own vision, his own life. He pushed the estate toward organic farming and sustainable land management. He commissioned Poundbury, the model village near Dorchester that now houses more than 3,000 people. Built according to his architectural principles, a living experiment in traditional design and community-centered planning. He founded Duchy Organics in 1990, a food brand that became associated for a generation of British consumers with responsible agriculture. The brand later ran into financial trouble after the 2008 crisis and was eventually licensed to Waitrose, but its origins told you something important about how Charles saw the estate, not just as income, but as a platform. The duchy funded Charles's public engagements, his charitable work, his household, and woven through all of that, quietly, over years, and then over decades, was Camilla. And this is where I need you to think carefully about what woven through actually means in practical terms. Camilla was not a formal duchy employee. She held no official role within the estate's governance structure. But the household she and Charles built together, Clarence House, the staff, the operational costs of a relationship that eventually became the most scrutinized partnership in British public life. That household was sustained in part by a financial ecosystem built around duchy income. Was this unusual? No. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. The Duke of Cornwall funds his life with duchy money. His life included Camilla. The money followed the life. But here is the sentence that changes everything. None of this was designed to survive a succession it never anticipated. September 8th, 2022. A Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle. The nation entered a state of formal mourning. The cameras tracked the new king as he moved through the rituals of grief and assumption, the proclamation, the vigil, the funeral that drew more global viewers than almost any broadcast in television history. Nobody made a ceremony of what happened simultaneously. In the same breath that Charles became king, he ceased to be Duke of Cornwall. The title did not pass through a ceremony. There was no moment of transfer, no public acknowledgement, no announcement. It happened the way constitutional succession always happens in Britain, automatically, instantly, without pause. William became the 25th Duke of Cornwall, £1 billion in net assets, £21 million in annual income, 128,000 acres across 20 counties, the Oval, the prison, the national park. All of it transferred to a 40-year-old man who had spent the previous several years doing something most observers had barely noticed, systematically learning the institution he was about to own. The world was watching a king be mourned and crowned. What they were not watching, what almost no one was watching, was the invisible, structural shift happening simultaneously. A financial architecture that had been built around one man's life, one man's choices, one man's household, was now the property of someone who had made very different choices and had very different plans. On the same day the world buried a queen, a £1 billion estate changed hands. And somewhere inside that estate, an access timeline had already begun its countdown. Here is what the people who watched William closely already understood. He was never going to inherit this estate and leave it the way he found it. This is not speculation. The Duchy of Cornwall's own annual financial reports document it. In the years before the Queen died, William and his personal advisors had been attending non-executive governance committees. They were reviewing oversight structures, meeting new members, learning the ledgers. The official language of the reports describes it as preparation. But preparation for what exactly? Preparation for this. Look at William's public institutional work, and you see someone who thinks systemically. His Homewards initiative, a commitment to addressing homelessness across the United Kingdom, is not a charity gala. It is a place-based, a data-driven program that works through local partnerships and structural reform. You do not design a program like Homewards if you believe that surfaces change things. You design it if you understand that systems are what sustain or prevent outcomes. His Earthshot Prize operates the same way. It is not about rewarding good intentions. It is about scaling solutions, finding environmental interventions that can be institutionalized, replicated, embedded into the way the world actually functions. William thinks in structures. He always has. And when he walked into the Duchy of Cornwall's governance framework, he did not walk in as a grieving son inheriting a family heirloom. He walked in as an institutional operator who had already mapped every room. The question was never whether William would make changes. The question was always, which changes would he make first? And who would feel them? The restructuring did not arrive with a press release. It never does when it is serious. What happened inside the duchy's governance after William assumed control looked from the outside like routine administration. Committees were reviewed. Authorization protocols were revised. The delineation between what the duchy's annual surplus funds officially and what its discretionary private estate funds cover was formally re-examined. New signatures replaced old ones. Access to specific financial instruments was reclassified. To understand why this matters, you need to understand the distinction between the duchy's general surplus and its private estate funds. What the surplus, the income left after the duchy's operational costs, is the figure that gets reported publicly. It is scrutinized, if imperfectly, by Parliament. It is the number that appears in annual accounts. But the private estate funds are different. They are discretionary. They sit in the gap between the official and the personal. They are the mechanism through which a duke's income translates into his actual life. For 50 years, Charles used that mechanism. His household, his relationships, his vision for what the duchy could be and do. All of it was channeled through a system with almost no external accountability. A system that a parliamentary committee had already flagged as requiring investigation. William inherited that system. And William, he who has spent years thinking about what responsible institutional governance looks like, began asking the questions that Charles never had to face. What commitments were made, by whom, under what authority, and do they serve the institution's future? Some arrangements survived that question. Others did not. The household most exposed to the restructuring, the household that had relied most heavily on the informal financial ecosystem built inside Charles's duchy tenure, belongs to the Queen Consort. And by the time anyone thought to ask what had changed, the changes had already been filed. I want to be precise here because it would be easy, and wrong, to frame this as a story about a stepmother and a stepson. That framing is satisfying. It is also a distraction from the structural reality. Like Camilla spent 20 years building legitimacy inside an institution that was never fully comfortable hosting her. She endured public hostility on a scale that would have broken most people. She navigated the protocols of royal life with a patience that her critics rarely credited. She watched the man she loved become king. And on the day of his coronation, she became Queen Consort, a formal title, a crown, a constitutional recognition that the journey was, at last, complete. What the crown could not give her, what no title, however senior, could guarantee, was financial independence inside the institution she had just joined. Here is the structural truth that I think is being missed in most of the coverage. Camilla's financial position was always built on proximity, not on ownership. And she inhabited a household funded by a duchy she had no formal relationship with. The informal arrangements that sustained that household, the discretionary flows of private estate funds, the operational costs absorbed within the duchy's financial architecture, those arrangements were Charles's to make because the duchy was Charles's to govern. He is no longer Duke. He has not been Duke for more than 2 years. And William, who is Duke, has made different arrangements. There is no malice required to explain this. There is only the simple, structural logic of institutional succession. The person who holds the title makes the financial decisions. The people who benefited from the previous holder's decisions do not carry an automatic right to continuation. Camilla won the public battle. She outlasted the critics. She received the crown. But public legitimacy and financial structures are not the same arena. And in the financial arena, the rules were always going to be written by whoever held the duchy's pen. She thought she had permanence. She had proximity. And those two things, though they can feel identical for decades, are never actually the same thing. Okay, this is the part where I step back from the palace and talk directly to you. Because if the only thing this story teaches us is something about royals, we've wasted each other's time. The Duchy of Cornwall has operated for nearly 7 centuries with a level of financial opacity that would not be tolerated in any publicly listed company. It does not pay corporation tax. It does not pay capital gains tax. Its private estate funds, the discretionary layer between the official surplus and the Duke's personal expenditure, are reviewed by almost no one outside the institution's own committees. A parliamentary committee has called for scrutiny. That scrutiny remains incomplete. Why does that matter? Because when an institution operates without accountability, the people who live inside its financial architecture assume that their arrangements are stable. They mistake institutional tolerance for institutional commitment. They mistake access for ownership. And then the succession happens. I want to say this as plainly as I can. The most dangerous financial arrangement you can inhabit is one that exists only because someone with authority has not yet decided to end it. It doesn't matter how long it has been in place. It doesn't matter how publicly acknowledged it has become. It doesn't matter how logical it seems from the inside. If the foundation of that arrangement is another person's discretion, not a contract, not a law, not a structure you own, then you are always one decision away from losing it. This is not a lesson about greed or cruelty. It is a lesson about the difference between formal power and assumed access, between what is yours and what you have been permitted to use, between the title and the funds that the title does not automatically bring with it. William is not doing something extraordinary. He is doing what every rational, operationally minded institutional leader does when they inherit a structure. He is aligning the institution's financial governance with his own priorities, his charitable work, his modernizing vision, his sense of what the Duchy of Cornwall should be for in the 21st century, under his name, in his time. And the people who built their financial lives inside the previous Duke's priorities are now learning what institutional succession actually feels like from the inside. The system doesn't play favorites. The system doesn't hold grudges. The system simply continues, under whoever currently holds the pen, and right now, that person is William. So where does this leave us? The palace will not issue a statement confirming that Camilla's access to private duchy estate funds has been restructured. That is not how these things are communicated. What the palace does is say nothing, and let the financial architecture speak for itself. The Duchy of Cornwall will publish its next annual report. The surplus will be reported, and the governance committees will meet. William's name will appear in the appropriate authorization lines. The institution will continue, as it has continued for nearly 7 centuries, operating in the comfortable gap between public scrutiny and private discretion. But something has changed, not just for the people inside those walls, for the institution itself. Because William is not Charles. He is not content to manage a legacy. He is building one. And the financial infrastructure of the duchy, for the first time in 50 years, is being shaped by a man with a fundamentally different vision of what it should do, who it should serve, and where its resources should flow. Camilla has her title. She has her formal position. She has the sovereign grant, the official public funding mechanism that supports working royals. What she no longer has, it appears, is the same informal access to the discretionary financial ecosystem that Charles constructed around his 50-year tenure as Duke. That ecosystem is gone, or rather, it has been redesigned. And the redesign does not include the same doors. Here is the moral I want to leave you with, not just as a story about a duchess and a duchy, but as a truth about how power actually works. Access granted by one generation is not guaranteed by the next. Arrangements built inside someone else's authority are always provisional. The title on your door and the funds behind it are two entirely separate things. And the people who forget that distinction are always the ones most surprised when the succession comes. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the end of an assumption, and those two things never feel the same. If this kind of analysis is valuable to you, if you want to keep understanding the stories behind the stories, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments. Do you think the Duchy's financial opacity is finally about to face real scrutiny? Or will the institution close ranks, as it always has, and let the silence do the work? I read every comment. Let's talk about it.